Hi, everyone. My name is Emily Gracie, and I'm the host of Off the Radar. Every week, I remind you that this podcast is about weather, science, the ocean, space, and much more. But perhaps the most important element I'm missing there is people. Because the human experience of weather can teach us so much, perhaps more than scientific research alone. And at the end of the day, that human experience is why we forecast weather. Sometimes that means knowing you'll have a nice sunny afternoon for a family cookout or a fun day at the beach. Other times, weather is very much a matter of life or death. It's about knowing whether you should evacuate your home and if your family will have enough time to get to safety. Those colors and graphics on the map aren't just theoretical circumstances. They're entire communities in the path of danger. Huge collections of lives that can be impacted at an instant. That's the kind of human experience we'll be talking about today. This week marks 20 years since Hurricane Katrina devastated New Orleans and the surrounding areas. Today you'll hear from Traci Curry, director of the new National Geographic docuseries Hurricane Katrina: Race Against Time. She'll tell us about bringing this story to the screen 20 years later and what lessons that hindsight can offer meteorologists in the future. Her goal was to spotlight the experience of New Orleans residents, victims, and heroes. She's passionate about sharing the facts about the storm through the lens of those whose lives were forever changed by it. We'll also hear from a survivor who experienced the harrowing devastation, squalor, and salvation that occurred in the New Orleans Superdome, where thousands sought refuge only to face days without power, adequate food, or sanitation. Our brave guest, Shelton Alexander, will share his story of survival. But his story isn't just about physical endurance. It's about how he emotionally survived, something he's still working on. When I spoke to him, he struggled to find the words to convey what happened, to make narrative sense of something so incomprehensible. But where conversation falls short of explaining life, art tells the whole story. Shelton is a poet who's made art about his experience. Throughout this episode, you'll hear Shelton recite excerpts from his poem titled "I Was There." Shelton's poetry conveys more about Hurricane Katrina than any map, statistic, or image ever could. It's a powerful reminder of resilience and rebuilding a life, something everyone in New Orleans that day 20 years ago can relate to. If your life was impacted by Hurricane Katrina, I hope you can relate to Shelton's writings too. And if you're a meteorologist or a reporter, I hope Shelton's poetry serves as a reminder that we forecast the weather for people. It sounds simple enough, but stories like this are a powerful reminder of what meteorology really means for the people who live in the maps we project across the screen.
I was there. What the future holds, we are unaware. Storms like Hurricane Katrina, historically are rare. 3D glasses might need your pair. Death, destruction, despair, you bet people were scared.
You're just not going to find better people than the people in New Orleans.
Traci Curry is an Oscar-nominated producer and director. But when she was tasked to tell the story of Hurricane Katrina, she felt the weight of the mission.
I think the opportunity to tell this story was really appealing to me for a few reasons. I really like to kind of tell a sprawling story that has like lots of layers and moving parts. And I really enjoy the challenge of kind of wrangling all of that. But I also, in my work, am interested in exploring the ways that sort of systems and institutions can kind of constrain the conditions of our lives, because I think a lot of times it happens very invisibly. And we like to sort of point to individual actors because systems and institutions are kind of hard to get your hands around. Like it just kind of feels like this sort of elusive thing. And so I'm really interested in my work in the ways in which trying to make the invisible feel visible and make the implicit feel explicit. And so this was an opportunity to do that and to also do it in a way that restores this story to the people of New Orleans, because I think there's a way that we we, meaning those of us who experienced Katrina as viewers, remember Katrina as something that happened to America sort of writ large. And it really wasn't. It was something that happened to these people in this particular city in ways that continue to kind of reverberate in their lives 20 years on.
One of those voices is Shelton Alexander.
Yeah, I was watching the news like on a regular, and I was seeing it change a little bit more and more, and it seemed like it was coming for us a little bit more, and it was like, man, it was just starting to feel this way.
Former Marine, poet, and son.
I said, the water's coming, all we'll do is die together.
A son more concerned about his mother's safety than his own.
And so when I looked in her eyes and I said, that's all we can do. And, just keep in mind, I already had training and swim, qual in the Marines and all that. So I was a, pretty good swimmer, but I know the work that it would have took, to try to help save her too. And so that kind of helped me remind myself, now y'all need to get out of there, at least try,
But there came a point where he realized it was time for him to leave too. He had a truck, but no money. Fortunately, a family member handed him a $20 bill and told him to hit the road.
So it was hard finding the gas at first, but later on, a little $20 really helped us out because we was able to find, some gas at some point. But still, it was gonna be rough. That only was gonna give us a half a tank or something. You know what I mean? It was no full tank, and we're in the F-150.
His goal was to make it to Baton Rouge, but he never made it out of New Orleans.
Yeah, right. That's where I thought I was headed. Because as I'm sitting on Airline Highway and I'm stuck in the traffic, it was one of those things where it's like, man, I don't want to die on the highway. You know what I mean? I don't want to get stuck, out here. So I was like, we've been knowing about and watching the news here, and the mayor, Nagin, saying the Superdome would be the shelter of last resort. So kind of knew if it didn't work out on the highway, then the goal was to get to the Superdome. And the Superdome, you just thinking in your head, man, this is a big place. They got a lot of parking everywhere. The storm will blow over in a couple of days or whatever the case may be. And, so we made the decision. We turned around and headed for the Dome. And, once again, I'm going to say, I'm just glad I was led there.
Shelton was one of the last arrivals at the Superdome. This part of the story will be important later on.
As we driving toward the Superdome, right, they had 2 National Guard members, and I guess my truck is a Ford F-150, is white, so it looked like a basic utility truck, right? So I'm coming towards them, and we driving on the backside of the Superdome at this time, and the National Guard members just waving me over, come this way, and he led me through the gate where it seemed like that's where the utility vehicles and the buses were for the Superdome. It was weird. And he just waved us over there.
Once inside the Superdome, Shelton settled in for a long night. As you'll see in the National Geographic series, he video recorded the entire experience. Something commonplace with smartphones today, but much more rare in 2005. These recordings have brought truth and exposure to what occurred in those days following landfall. That and his poetry.
At the end of the hall, look, but don't stare. Some elders didn't move or use the restrooms as if they were glued to their chairs. Accountability to those souls, the sole reason I share. The truth is hard, at least it's fair, sad but true, I'll take you. I was there. But we stood in very long lines, it was a desperate time. Can't let them forget, that's why I wrote these rhymes. Marched and sung hymns with them like, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. In the Superdome, I'm gonna let it shine.
My feeling is that if the people who survived it can have sort of the strength and the grace and the fortitude to revisit all of this with me and with the teams that I work with for the sake of telling the story and so that it might be known and that the truth might be known. The least I can do is sit through it with them. There wasn't a single interview where there were not tears, including my own. But I think that's okay. I think it is right to feel disturbed and uncomfortable with it. I don't necessarily think that I would want to feel okay about doing any of this work. And so I don't know, I feel like it's a privilege to be able to do this and to be able to allow people to have this platform. And if part of what goes along with that is some difficulty or discomfort for me in being with it, then I think that feels okay to me.
God is good all the time. Meanwhile, giving one MRE, meals ready to eat, a bottle of hot water, a riot almost started, Sheldon pushed forward over food, a shortage, backed up, bathrooms and toilets drank, contaminated water out of the faucets, look up, what the, raindrops keep falling on my head. Like B.J. Thomas inside of the Superdome, but if I would have been home instead, I probably would have been dead from the storm.
Since Hurricane Katrina, there have been dozens of documentaries portraying every aspect of the storm. But Traci's vision was different, a new angle to learn from, decades later.
In doing the research, one of the things that really emerged for me was that, yes, we know that there is this sort of man-made barrier, kind of the concrete barrier of the levees that was compromised by the inadequacy of the way the Army Corps of Engineers built them. But one of the things that was less apparent was that I kind of thought about it as the sort of concentric rings of protection that were failing. So there's sort of the ring of protection of making sure people can get out of the city or that they're protected. Then there's the physical man-made barrier of the levees. But beyond that, if you pull all the way out, there was this natural barrier, which was the coastal lands outside of Louisiana that had always sort of protected New Orleans and the coastline from the full force of a hurricane, because when the hurricanes build power as they pick up water, as they move across water, and those bits of land would always sort of stop the hurricane. And it's one of the reasons why a lot of people didn't leave, because in New Orleans, they had been accustomed to this sort of Chicken Little, the sky's falling, the big one is coming, and then it either wouldn't come or it wouldn't be that big of a deal. Once I realized that, I was like, oh, there's something new to add to our understanding of the story, which is that this is a story of environmental justice, right? And I think realizing that allows us not only to add something new to the story of Katrina, but to put the story of Katrina in conversation with where we find ourselves today, which is to say that even since we started making this series, we've had in Asheville, North Carolina, a flood of that city. We've had the fires in Lahaina and the fires in LA. And while there's sort of the circumstances are different from Katrina, the contours of the story are the same, which is to say you have these extreme weather events that have been exacerbated by man-made impacts on the environment. Those events encounter infrastructure that was never designed to withstand the strength of these events. And then what happens is that the people who are most vulnerable on the front end of the storm for, whatever reasons, and we get into some of those in the series, have the most difficult time recovering on the back end. And so it really kind of allowed us to tease out sort of what I was saying earlier about those sort of structural and institutional things, because we see in the storm that the story that the flood did not discriminate. All races, all classes, everybody lost a lot. But the recovery is where we sort of begin to see how some of those structures and institutions create a disparate outcome for some people and not others.
Locked up, acting member of the National Guards, I said, why are we being held as prisoners of war? He responded, following orders, martial law. Understand, it felt more like Afghanistan and Iraq and not New Orleans. There were heroes of the storm, and those of them that went too far. Pray for them. They too bear scars.
The hurricane was gone, but the chaos was just beginning.
The National Guards wouldn't let us out of the Superdome. It was like almost like they held us hostage. Like they didn't know who was in charge, but yet they didn't want to let us, the ones that they had in there already, they didn't want to let us out.
When the residents were finally released from the Superdome, Shelton emerged expecting to see his truck underwater with the rest of the vehicles in the area. But he looked up and saw his truck sitting on a hill above the floodwater. He got in, started the engine, and drove away.
When I started walking through the water and came back, their vehicles was underwater. It was a blessing that, see what I'm saying? It just, my steps was guided. It was a blessing that I made it over, because the way it is like a bridge. It was like the utility spot. You got like an overpass that's right here. And so I was able to pull up my truck just a little bit off the ground, at least 1.5 feet. And then they had the cover of the bridge over the top. So I backed in and parked right there. And that turned out to be a huge blessing because I was kind of off the ground. I wasn't just on the ground. Like when the water started rising, if I would have been on the ground, it would have been trouble. But yeah, they led me to the spot. Like seemed like that could have been a mistake, so-called, but I don't believe in mistakes. Like everything happened for a reason to me anyway. So it was kind of like, wow, those guys led me to the right spot.
One of the things that I heard consistently, and this is different people in different sort of parts of the city, was that to those of us who go to New Orleans as visitors, as tourists, New Orleans feels like New Orleans always has, or like the New Orleans of our imagination. It matches with our experience. So it's Mardi Gras, it's Jazz Fest, it's Bourbon Street, it's all the things. But for the people who are from there, they kind of have this bifurcated experience of their city as before Katrina and after Katrina to this day. And so that sort of let me know, okay, we need to tell a story that is a people story. That's sort of the way that I think of it. I really wasn't interested in like your federal people and like your presidents and your governors and all of those folks. Like I really wanted to allow the people of New Orleans to speak for themselves and tell the story as they experienced it, because I think the rest of us had a lot to learn from them. They're deeply knowledgeable about their own city. Then on another trip, we met with General Honore, who you see in the series, who I think is just a favorite of, of every. And one of the things that General Honore told us, and I visited with Miles, our showrunner, and Laura Dodd, our New Orleans-based producer, is that what Katrina was what you experienced, where you were, where you stood in it. And so that sort of let me know that Katrina was not an experience, it was many different experiences. Like there's almost as many Katrina stories as there are Katrina survivors, as people who lived it. So I understood that we needed to kind of collect as many of these different pieces of the story to even begin trying to come up with something that conveyed what the whole of it was. And so some of it was like, literally, where were you? Were you in the Superdome? Were you in the convention center? Were you stuck in your house? Were you on the highway? Were you a first responder that just kind of got out there and did it? Were you someone that got a boat and started saving your neighbors? Were you a member of city government? And so we knew that we had to kind of collect all of those different pieces. So that sort of informed, the kind of people that we were looking for to tell the story. And so one of the great things about New Orleans is that people there are sort of natural raconteurs, natural storytellers. It's something in the culture. So, I want to say that it was just difficult finding all of these wonderful people. And it was challenging finding them. But once we did, it sort of was inevitable that they were going to be the fantastic storytellers that they are, because that's just sort of the nature of New Orleans. And then the other thing was we wanted to try to, as much as possible, tell a whole city story, because this is an entire American city that was underwater, 80% of the city that was underwater. And I think at the time, the media focus was on certain parts of the city, but you're talking about every neighborhood from the westernmost point of the city to the easternmost point of the city that was underwater. And New Orleans is really this patchwork of neighborhoods that all had their unique sort of thing. And also where you were during Katrina really informed a lot of what your experience was. So just with that understanding that there are all these kind of moving pieces and then figuring out what those pieces were, that really sort of helped us begin to approach like who we wanted to talk to and how we wanted to tell the story. My biggest concern was how the people of New Orleans and the people who were in it feel about it, and the hope that they feel like we got it right. And after kind of premiering it with them in New Orleans, it feels like they did, that they're happy with how we told the story. And I hope that everyone else watches it, sees them in a way that they were not seen at the time. Like we see in the story that there were some dehumanizing kind of narratives about the way the people of New Orleans comported themselves during this incident. And I hope that we've done a good job and that people understand the truth, which is that the way they responded to this incident was extraordinary, that these ties of kinship and community that they have in the worst of circumstances did not break. And so that really is like my biggest hope, that these people, the people in this city, are seen for exactly who they are and like the wonderful, amazing people that they are.
And thank the Lord for the Air Force and the Coast Guard. Flew helicopter and rescue missions nonstop, got people and pets off of porches and rooftops. Lauded by nature would say hip-hop parade for General Honoré, and all first responders, I have to give them props. They saved so many lives and they worked around the clock. I'm from there, I'm from where we believe in everything happens for a reason in due season. You may or may not even care. They say God won't put more on you than you can bear. The Most High wanted me to be, so I was there. And that's in the past, and it may have taken a while, but I'm so glad I done got over at last. I'm here now.
Katrina: Race Against Time is now streaming all episodes on Disney Plus and Hulu. I highly recommend you watch the entire series. It's amazing. Off the Radar is a production of the National Weather Desk. Make sure you're following the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. New episodes publish every Tuesday. Also, subscribe to the National Weather Desk on YouTube, where I'll be sharing more content about this series and about Hurricane Katrina throughout the week. Thank you to Traci Curry and Shelton Alexander for talking with me today. This episode of Off the Radar was produced and edited by me, Emily Gracie, with writing help from Brian Petrus. Thanks to the National Weather Desk and Sinclair Broadcast Group for their ongoing support of the podcast. I'm meteorologist Emily Gracie. Make it a great day.